Do you realize that you have all the power you need to do everything God has called you to do? You have all the power you need to obey God and to make a difference in the lives of other people. You have been empowered if you have been born again. What am I talking about? I'm talking about the Holy Spirit who comes into your life is the resident source of power for you to live the Christian life. We're told in Romans 8:11, it says, the Spirit of Him who raised Jesus from the dead dwells in you. The same Spirit, the same power that raised Jesus from the dead with Satan and his demons and everything and everyone else trying to keep him dead, the same Spirit that raised Jesus from the dead, that same power lives in you. You have all the power you need to do everything God's called you to do. Paul said he prayed for the Ephesian Christians regularly. He says that according to the riches of His glory, that they would be strengthened with might through His Spirit in the inner man, the Spirit of God who dwells in our hearts through faith. You have the Spirit of God in you. You've been empowered. Think of all the things He does. Let me mention a few. He helps us. He helps us. He's our helper. That's the comforter. Jesus said, He enlightens us about truth and helps us understand truth. He's the one that makes us holy. The Holy Spirit makes us holy. He gives us the power to say no to sin and yes to God. He empowers evangelism. He gives us the power to be His witnesses in every situation. He pours forth into our hearts the very love of God so that we experience God's love and we can give other people the experience of God's love. The Holy Spirit leads us. He leads His people. He prays in us, which is a beautiful thing when you're praying in the Spirit and you don't know how to pray, but He's praying in you, and it's also amazing, He's also praying for you. Think about that. The Holy Spirit's praying for you. He transforms us. 2 Corinthians 3, we are transformed little by little from glory to glory into the very image of Jesus Christ through the Spirit of God. He's the one that gives us the victory. The ability to say no to sin and yes to God, yes to righteousness. He bears fruit within our hearts. The fruit of us having a ministry that impacts other people, and the fruit of the Spirit, love and joy and peace and patience and kindness, gentleness, meekness, faith, and self-control. And He does all that and more. He's the one that empowers our lives to do everything God has commanded us to do. It's interesting, if you study the Old Testament, you find God's great leaders. God's Spirit came upon them to do what God called them to do. Joshua, 4 of the judges are mentioned. Saul, at the beginning of his reign, before he got off track, it was the Spirit of God that gave him the ability to rule and reign and make a difference. David was an effective leader as he was walking with the Spirit of God. Jesus, it's fascinating. Jesus didn't do any ministry for the first 30 years of His life. He didn't preach a sermon. He didn't do any of those things until the Spirit of God came upon Him in His baptism. And then He was led by the Spirit. He was empowered by the Spirit after His 40 days of fasting. He said, the Spirit of the Lord has come upon me to preach the gospel of peace to the poor. And He said, I don't do anything except by the Spirit of God. Jesus, think about it. Luke is the most human of all the Gospels. Jesus, 100% God, but also 100% man. And as a human, He didn't do anything without the power of the Holy Spirit, because He knew that the Spirit of God in Him was the power of God in Him. Think about this. The deacons, what was the primary qualification? They had to be full of the Spirit in Acts chapter 6. Think of Saul, who later became Paul, when Barnabas asked him to come to Antioch and help. What was the qualification? He was a young man who was full of the Spirit of God. Are you full of the Holy Spirit? You can't be full of the Spirit if you're full of yourself. The key to being full of the Spirit is just surrendering your life to God. The more of your life you surrender, the more of the Holy Spirit you get to experience it. As your life is set on His goal, the Spirit's goal is to glorify Jesus. As your life is set on that goal, the Holy Spirit fills you, enables you, equips you to do everything God has called you to do.